I'm Bob Shrum, the director of the Center for the Political Future here at USC Dornsife, and I want to welcome all of you who are here and all of you who are watching our live stream. It's an honor to introduce what I think of as a very special event today, Edible America on food security, organic farming, and the art of eating well, all of which impact not only our health, but the health of our planet. Our spring 2024 fellow Douglas Brinkley, one of the country's foremost public intellectuals, a presidential historian, and the author of a new landmark book on the environmental movement, will engage with the legendary Alice Walters, whose writings and works, and her new book, by the way, is entitled We Are What We Eat, have literally changed the way America thinks about and consumes food. I should add that Doug is the Katherine Tsanoff Brown Chair in Humanities at Rice University and is a frequent commentator, as I suspect all of you know, on national television. Alice Waters founded the incomparable Chez Panisse in Berkeley half a century ago, pioneering California and farm-to-table cuisine. And she continues that revolution today, both there and at Lulu in the Hammer Museum in Westwood. There will be lunch and a signing of Alice's and Doug's new books afterwards, but I can't promise you that the lunch will match the standards of Chez Panisse. Doug and Alice have joined forces in a project with the Ford Motor Company that I hope they'll talk a little bit about today. Now let's hear from two remarkable people who are literally forces of nature. Doug, Alice.
Hi guys. Bob, what a nice, thoughtful introduction. Couldn't be better. It's an honor for me to be able to be with Alice. We've become friends. I'm a huge admirer of hers. And I just urge all of you to make sure you read We Are What We Eat, a slow food manifesto. It is a life-changing book. And Alice, I want to just start with this. You call it a slow food manifesto, and I hear that term used quite a bit, slow food. What is slow food?
Well, slow food is a movement internationally that was started by Carlo Petrini in Italy and is now in 156 countries around the world. And it started because somebody wanted to put a McDonald's in the middle of Rome at the bottom of the Spanish Steps. And Carlos said, no way. And he set up a table, I think, that went quite a long way in front of those steps. And he had a group of people that sat at that table, and they were fed by the local restaurants, and they refused to move until that decision was reversed. And I'd like to say it was. And so he has always believed in education, as I have. And I became his vice president many years ago. And they have an event every year in Torino that everybody's invited to come to. And there are representatives from all those countries. And so you really get to hear and see what people are growing. Sometimes people bring seeds, and sometimes they bring information about farms in that particular country, but it's always been an event that really inspires me. So that's what slow food officially is about. But what I'm practicing as slow food is really caring about where you buy the food. And at the beginning, and maybe I'm a little long-winded about this, I went to France in the 60s, and you might know that that was a time when France was a slow food nation. They only had food that was grown within the area of that particular city, and I was staying in Paris. They didn't have any olive oil in Paris. That was south of France, but we had pretty good butter. And I fell in love with taste. And I didn't know at that time. I thought it was just the French cooking that made it so divine. And then I came back and I wanted to eat and live like the French. And I couldn't find that food. And so in a really naive moment, I said, well, maybe if I start a restaurant, a French restaurant, the food will come. Well, in fact, the food did come. And the food came because we got connected to a farmer who grew that food. It was right at the beginning of farmers markets, and I didn't go to those at that time, but we heard about this farmer, Bob Kennard, and my first really divine thing that I ate was a peach from Matsumoto in September. And it's that has made Chez Panisse what it is, because we only buy directly from the farmers, the ranchers, the fishers, and pay them the real cost. I'm not asking for a wholesale price. I am giving them the money, and I'm picking it up myself. So I'm taking all of the food scraps back to Bob's farm and picking up the vegetables.
And the restaurant was opened in 1971. So tell us about the years leading up to 71 with political activism in the 60s. And she showed me earlier Mario Savio. I don't know if young people remember the free speech movement back at Berkeley, but tell us about that what you're wearing, if I don't choke you.
I'm wearing a National Honor Society pin, which his family gave to me after I spoke so often about Mario Savio inspiring me, because I walked into the free speech movement in 1964 on the campus, and it was really happening. It was an anti-war movement, it was civil rights, but it was about free speech. And I was really very, again, very naive and not political at all. And Mario Savio spoke, and I listened. He was Italian, he was Sicilian. He had wine with dinner every night. But that wasn't what really impressed me. What impressed me was his way of thinking about education. And during the free speech movement, you wouldn't dare to go to a class that was taught by somebody who didn't believe in free speech. So I ended up taking Beethoven's symphonies and astronomy and medieval literature from England, and it woke me up in this way. And he encouraged us all to visit other countries, learn about the rest of the world. And it's why I decided to take off in 65 and go to school in France. Although I didn't go to school. I didn't know how to speak French. And I thought maybe there's an easier way to learn how to speak it, and there was. fall in love with a Frenchman. No, but that wasn't, it was falling in love with food. And I never tasted food like that. I mean, my parents had a victory garden during the war. And so we did have strawberries out of the garden, and they made applesauce and all of that, but they weren't really good cooks. And so it was something very important to me, I wanted to learn the basics of cooking.
And who taught you the basics?
Well, actually,
Self-taught?
well, I had a bookstore in Berkeley, and they carried a lot of cookbooks. And they introduced me to Elizabeth David, who was a Francophile and lived in England. And that book became a Bible of mine. And then there was Richard Olney, who lived in France, and was, again, cooking that way, right out of his garden. And I got that big, thick book, Le Russe Gastronomique. So you could always look up in that book about anything.
Did, not to dwell on him too much, but for Mario Savio, what was he like if you went and took him places for speeches and all? What was he mesmerizing in person? Did he?
Yeah.
What was special about his oratory?
He was mesmerizing. I mean, he got up on top of that car at Sproul Plaza, and he really spoke from his heart. And he was always introducing people to each other. You know, have you met so-and-so, and all of that. And I know that Bob Shear, who teaches here, was passing out in the plaza how we got involved with Vietnam. And Mario wanted to know about everything. It wasn't just, as I said, about free speech. He was talking about always a big picture of democracy. Always thinking about everybody has a part to play.
And with the younger people here that weren't around, I was a baby through part of this in the 60s, but tell us just an impression of the Bay Area, of that, let's call it the Beat generation and the counterculture. What was happening in those days that sticks with you all these decades later?
Well, people were speaking their truth. And whether it was the Black Panthers in Oakland, or whether, I mean, it was across the whole culture. It wasn't, in just one place. And when I just saw the film about the Black Panthers recently, because a friend of mine made that film, I couldn't believe that they were really talking about free school lunch and it being nutritious and all of those things back then. And I mean, I must have absorbed it, but I really felt like it was about education somehow. I mean, yes, I was a student, but it was bigger than that. It was about our children and teaching them the values. And of course, when the 70s came around and we learned that ketchup was a vegetable, that was the beginning of the industrialization of the school system, really. And we haven't really talked about it nationally since then.
In what, it's an important point because we all know what those cafeterias feel like and what the food is and at public schools. But what can be done? And if you could deal with the term farm to table, do you like that term? You hear people say it's a farm to table restaurant. What's your take?
Well, I always liked it, but the question is what farm? What farm and what table? I like to say restaurant to farm or school supported agriculture, because we need to learn from those farmers and ranchers and the people who feed us. And I wrote that one little sentence that Harry S. Truman said, "In the long view, no nation is healthier than its children or more prosperous than its farmers." And I really feel that. And I am dependent on them. Farm to table sounds like the farmers have the responsibility. And I want it to be, table to farm, where we support them. And I know that when you don't pay that middleman to bring the food, you give all the money to the people who are doing the right thing. And I was just lucky to find Bob Kennard in California because my parents were worried about the restaurant succeeding back in those early days because we had no money and we only had, can you believe this, one menu, no choices, 4 courses, appetizer, second course, main course, salad or cheese, and dessert. And it changed every night. And it changed according to what we found. But it's been full for almost 53 years, so I guess it tastes pretty good. And it's not cheap. But upstairs, we started the cafe so that our friends could afford to come all the time. And again, same principles involved. Absolutely. When the peaches are over, they're over. And so I know that this is a way to get students excited about eating. And eating together is very important as well.
When Bob Shrum mentioned being with Ford people up in Michigan, what was really amazing is to see a corporation like Ford starting to think about the Detroit schools and how they can get better lunches. Who doesn't want kids in high school to get a better lunch? So I understand it. But I didn't know till we were there, Alice, Michigan is the second largest agricultural economy in the US after California. And I got to really think when I was there talking to Alice and tasting food of local, going to local gardens and the like, it's really remarkable how important the school lunch is. That this is an opportunity where all the public, high schools, let's say, but all schools are meeting. And yet they're in these white kind of prison-like with plastic tray with all this. And I was impressed that a company like Ford is open-hearted and looking into this. So it made me realize this isn't a fringe movement you're on, but you're on a wave that I think of the future. Tell us about what you would envision as an edible school lunch, and what should lunch be like in our public schools?
Well, first of all, I have to say that this is a really viable solution to climate, because we are talking about not just organic food, but regeneratively farmed food, or the grazing of animals on regenerative land. And so it's pulling down that carbon and putting it in the ground where it belongs. And so it's like how could we have a solution like this that we have control over, that we don't exercise? And so I have really been trying to work with the University of California, because if they do it, and they do it well, it can be a map for K through 12. It'll go across the country and around the world. And so way back when, I talked to Janet Napolitano, who did believe in this always, and she said, introduce me to President Drake. And President Drake is very serious about this at this moment. So if any of you know him in the room, give him a call. No, but it is the Board of Regents that makes those decisions. But we are trying to really help to make that happen. And the institute that I started at Davis asked me to do an institute for edible education and regenerative ag. And I don't know whether you know that I started a project 30 years ago in one public school in Berkeley. You know about that. It's Martin Luther King Public School. It just happened to be. They have 1,000 teenagers, if you can imagine, 1,000. And the campus was 20 minutes walk from Chez Benny's. And one day the principal called me up and he said, could you come and maybe beautify the school? I hear you know something about gardening. And I couldn't resist that opportunity. And I went over there, and of course I had the whole thing in my head, particularly because I was a Montessori trained teacher. I taught 3-year-old kids, 3 to 6. I couldn't teach very long because I wasn't patient enough with those kids when I was 27. But I learned something very, very important from Montessori. And she wondered why children that lived in poverty and hunger could not learn like other children. And she understood from her, she was the first woman doctor in Italy in the 1880s. But she learned that our senses are the pathways into our minds. So we need to be smelling and tasting and touching and listening and seeing beautiful things. And this is food. It's very beautiful. And you know what this is? Yeah. But I said, when I went down to see the principal, I looked at this big piece of land. It was built on 17 acres of land for 500 students in 1921. Okay, that was the priority in 1921. And so here they had twice as many students and only a snack bar to eat in. And the kids just scraped everything off the plate, threw it in the garbage. I looked in the garbage cans. In fact, I climbed into a dumpster just to really examine after breakfast what was in there. Coffee cups, candy bar wrappers, just junk in the garbage can. And so I said to the principal, okay, I have an idea. Let's make a kitchen classroom and a garden classroom. I see the garden down there in that vacant lot, and we could use that portable building for a kitchen classroom. And not to teach gardening or cooking, but to teach all of the academic subjects. So let's say you're in a geography class, and I brought some of the little placemats that we made. And this one is about the Arabian Peninsula. And so we're learning about the geography of where that is and what they grow and what the country looks like. And then we're cooking pita bread and hummus and wilting greens. So they are touching and tasting and looking and experiencing their geography lessons in this very sensorial way. And guess what? They learn all the facts easily and they succeed. And the same thing happens in the garden. And so this idea, which we did 30 years, you have to help me hold up this map.
This is interesting.
And we just built a network upside down this way. Let's do it this way. There are 6,200 schools around the world on our network for edible education. And not because I've visited every one of the schools, but because they heard about the idea. And these are human values. And they just said, we'd like to be part of your network. And we have a training every year in June or July. And we teach this to maybe 300 or 500. But it's something that really doesn't require a lot of equipment, obviously in the garden, but even in the kitchen, a few little electric burners and a table like this. And some lessons, like this beautiful one is up the Silk Road in India. And they learn about it by each table. There are 3 tables. And they learn that they have to trade in order to get one thing from one table, they exchange with each other. And they learn about the Silk Road. But I think that edible education and school-supported agriculture are really something globally that could happen. And it brings the children into a new relationship.
And it brings agricultural farmers, workers, and growers, planters into an urban, it helps with that rural-urban divide that's plaguing our country in some ways.
Absolutely. But, you know, we went to see a garden outside of Detroit that was for people who had been just let out of prison and they needed jobs, and this one guy started a garden for them, and they were growing all the food that they were selling to the school at the Ford Center. And I mean, I know that I started the Edible Schoolyard Project because this woman, Katherine Sneed, had a project at this San Francisco County, not the San Francisco County Jail, and it was out in the country a little bit outside of San Francisco. And she called me one day and said, would you buy food for the restaurant and support our garden? And I said, sure, Katherine, of course. And she said, well, you have to come and meet my students. And I said, no, just send the food. I don't think I want to go to the jail. And she said, you must come to the jail and meet my students. So I did. And she gathered them around like this in a room. And she said, tell Alice about this project. And one young 19-year-old kid stood up and he said, I shouldn't be saying anything. This is my first week in the garden, and it's the best time of my life. And I can believe it was, because this garden was flourishing. And everybody who was sort of let out of jail wanted to be part of a halfway house garden that was happening in San Francisco. They got jobs with the Tree Corps in San Francisco, became vendors at the farmers market. But just from thinking about rehabilitation in jails, how we need to, I mean, in other countries around the world, it is about rehabilitation. It's really thinking about people's lives and how they can renew them.
And it's a trade,
Yeah.
right? They're learning something when they leave
Yes.
prison, that they're employable and can make a living, and getting fresh air, and it's good for mental health, just good gardening. And
The most important.
Pardon. How do you pick out, let's look at California, how did you know where to go? Did you just collect hints, like somebody says, this farm has got the best peaches, how did you go and find where to get the quality food?
Well, my parents helped with this because they saw me struggling at the restaurant. My father had been working at UC Berkeley. They moved to California. And he had been an agricultural engineer way back in college. But they said that we're going to go look for farmers for you, somebody. And they went to Davis and they asked for a list of all the organic farms that were within an hour's drive of Chez Benny's. And they found all of these farms. And they said, we've got 3 or 4, but Bob Kennard's the only one crazy enough to work with you. Because my father didn't know about regenerative ag. And when he went to Bob's farm, he couldn't see any of the vegetables in the row. He said, what's going on here? And Bob would move back the weeds and show him the vegetables. But Bob taught us so much. He would bring us these weeds, like purslane and nettles. Who knew that those were nutritious? And he'd say to us, cook them, make them good. And we started making a nettle pizza. Who knew? Everybody wanted to eat the nettle pizza because they couldn't imagine it. And it's that became so important to us. People found us because we were paying the real cost. That's what happened. And that's what I think could happen in the public school system, because the schools are the place that is taking care of everyone's children. And they're so important.
And those farmers that you're giving a high compliment now, as Alice Waters is literally an institution and a legendary figure in America. You wanting to buy something that they grow must be a big compliment. Like it's almost like you're giving it a 5-star gold rating for what they're. So they must just be very pleased when they hear your name that you might be getting food from them. Is that an accurate way to look at it?
I think it's become that way because a lot of restaurants around the country and around the world are buying food this way. And I think that they are really lifted up by it. But to think that you're growing food for a school is something incredibly important. And I think if we could talk about that, it would be, and to bring the farmers into the schools to meet the kids. And when we do that, and we bring chefs into the kitchen classroom and the garden classroom, and it's like, it's it's very helpful for the teacher because they're learning too about farming. And it's very important that we honor the people that feed us.
You know, one of the figures that people are re-looking at in my field, U.S. history, is George Washington Carver. If people remember his name, they associate it with Tuskegee Institute and particularly the peanut. And, you know, but turns out in all of these papers he wrote, he had a real natural instinct for regenerative farming. And his, you know, when you're looking at an important figure in this field, George Washington Carver, who was born as a slave in Diamond, Missouri, ended up what seemed to be kind of old-fashioned in some ways. What he was saying about is now like on the cutting edge and getting upgraded in history all the time. What goes on in the Black communities in America, Latino communities, on food, and how are they work with you in general? How do you connect with, or let's call it an urban Black neighborhood, predominantly Black in LA?
Well, I just have to go back to Edna Lewis because she was a real teacher to me. And she was in Georgia. I met her in Georgia, and she had a restaurant, but she farmed. And she was at all of those early gatherings of not only of slow food, but way before that. And you know, she wanted to bring her cow to the event so she could milk it there and make sure it was fresh and right. And we used to have a big event in New York called Meals on Wheels, and we had it in Rockefeller Center. And that was back in, I think, in the 80s. And that's how I met a lot of people around the country who really cared about feeding other people. But there were some really great cooks, and that's where I met Edna. And she made every pie herself. She rolled it all. Everybody had 10 people, and she only had herself. And Scott Peacock came and helped her if she needed a little extra. But she was a real inspiration to me, and her books are wonderful. And she farmed not only sort of south of Washington, D.C. in general, but she had what was she growing? Quail, or was it pigeon in New Jersey? And she was selling it to restaurants in New York, and she had a restaurant in Brooklyn ultimately. But when you read her books, you feel really connected to the food in the South. And I know for certain that it is the food that is both nourishing and easy to make, and everybody likes it. We're going to do this event in Washington, I hope, on the roof of the Smithsonian, and we're going to feed the farmers and the teachers. And I want to serve a school lunch that fits in the USDA reimbursement. It's only local, organic, regenerative. So I think it probably has to be in a really, I guess I didn't bring the placemat for that, but we're
That's like
gonna
October
we're
20th,
gonna,
right?
yes.
Right,
Yeah, we're gonna-
1920th, right before the election.
Yeah,
She's
and
got
we're-
the roof of the Smithsonian overlooking the mall.
And we're going to do the Three Sisters. So corn, squash, and beans. And that, to me, is one of the most nutritious, the easiest to grow. Can you use that corn stalk for the for the beans to go up, and the squash around to keep the moisture in on the bottom. But that grows pretty much everywhere at some time of the year. And there are so many great recipes, so many. I can't begin. I think we'll probably do cornbread.
Ooh, that sounds good.
But we'll probably do some great bean stew with, and the colors of these, again, are from around the world. I mean, beans are everywhere as the most nutritious vegetable we can eat. And so, I don't know, I believe so deeply that taste can win you over, and beauty.
And speaking of winning over, your great ally, friend, they just adopted you, or Barack and Michelle Obama. They are all about Alice Waters in so many different ways. How did that all happen, that the Obamas came into your life in such a tangible way?
Well, I was invited to come to an event in Chicago that was where Michelle Obama was speaking. And she was raising money for Barack. And I got there early and plopped myself in the front row. And when she finished speaking, I just said, you know, what I wanted to do in the public schools, and she really heard me. And of course, when she got to the White House, she found Sam Cass, who came to make that garden, and I knew of Sam Cass, but she asked me about a garden at the White House, and I said, it couldn't be better. It really couldn't be a better idea. And when so she started that garden with Sam Cass. And when I was in Rome, and I've been working at the American Academy in Rome, and I was there when it was announced that she had made a garden at the White House. It was on the front page of the newspaper in Rome. Front page. I nearly died. But that gave a kind of credibility to her and her ideas that were amazing for her, Barack's whole effort. And I can't say enough about that idea of victory gardens when we have all the pamphlets already printed, and they're sitting in Washington. They need to be reprinted. They were for the victory gardens in every climate, in every microclimate. I mean, the one for Washington, I was particularly interested because I went every year to do an event there, and I wanted to know what I could look for. Well, they had 22 different varieties of strawberries listed in that pamphlet, and I've only eaten about 10. And I just thought, wow, could that really be? And it's that biodiversity is heaven. I mean, you can have a different kind of salad every day of the year. Every day. And it's that makes me so excited, is the biodiversity of the world. And of course that, once you start getting into the biodiversity of food, then it goes straight to the biodiversity of people. And it just makes you know that there's something to learn from everybody. And I guess that's the bottom line of education.
And Michelle Obama, seized on this with her whole, everything for her became about,
Yes.
organic eating and good food. And she did a direct tie to obesity issues.
Yeah.
But she went, in many ways, as first lady after fast food culture, which was brave in its own way. But how did that develop in her, in your mind? Like, I mean, she didn't just do a garden at the White House. She went big on this.
Yeah, well,
With your philosophy.
She had children of her own. She knew what was being served in the schools. She made one big mistake, was to think that she could persuade Big Ag to be a partner in this. And I know there probably is some big company that would be willing to change, but if they can't get the money from it, they're not going to. And that's what this book is really about. I wanted to know how we lost our values, including our democracy. And I traced it back to the advent of fast food. And it's not just the food that's bad for you that you're eating, it's the values that come with food. More is better. Time is money. Everything should be fast, cheap, and easy. That has never been the case about food since the beginning of time. Never. You always spent time cooking and farming because that fed you. And we just took it. Everything should be available 24/7. I want what I want, and I want it. And I want to eat in my car. Okay, all of those values and many, many more come with fast food. And so we started eating that and changed our values.
What if you're somebody who loves a cheeseburger, loves French fries and a Pepsi?
I do
what
too.
What do you tell them to look for? A good
Organic potatoes,
okay.
organic oil to fry them in, organic roll, organic cakes for a mayonnaise if you're putting it on it, organic tomato, and organic cheese. You can have that. And it may cost a little bit more, but maybe you want to eat a little bit less. I can't resist the French fries from Chez Benny's. And I just know where everything comes from. And so for me, it's a really everyday experience of helping the planet, every time. And I want to buy it straight from the farmer's market. I want to give that money to the farmer. So I'm not looking for the supermarket. I do get a few things, but I always ask, even in a restaurant that doesn't say it on the menu. I go right back in the kitchen and say, where does it come from? But it's a decision that may cost a little more, but not very much. Not very much. And always gratifying. And as Ron Finley says, if you grow your own food, it's like printing your own money. And I do feel like that. I planted a victory garden during the pandemic in my front yard and put up a big victory garden sign. And everybody wanted to know what I was planting. So the deer didn't eat it. I said, well, they have to eat too. And so I put something out in that little parkway for the deer. And they ate the fennel over there. But it's something that's so gratifying. When you grow your own, you just feel, wow.
Are you seeing an uptick in urban farming or the victory garden concept? Are there things one can do in a large city?
Oh, yes. I mean, there are so many lands, there are so many parks. And I said to Gavin Newsom when he did a big slow food event in San Francisco, I don't know whether you know about that, but it was hugely successful. And he allowed us to plant a food garden right in front of City Hall. And it was so beautiful. I wish we had thought to keep it. But he said to me, I never thought that we should be planting food everywhere in every green space in the city. Because when it's harvested, basically, or overgrown, they just cut it down. But if it's kale, they could feed somebody with it. And they could farm it all organically. But he had never thought of that idea. And I think there are so many ideas like this out in this country right now, and we haven't gathered them, which is sad that a president or a governor of the state could do that. And it's certainly what Gavin has been doing in this state with Farm to School, what Jennifer Newsom is doing. It's amazing. And then you go and visit the schools and talk to them. And we had a lunch on Earth Day last year. It's something I wanted to do, kind of in the spirit of what we want to do in Washington. But we made a table out at a farm that was within the city limits of Sacramento. And we wanted teachers and politicians and students and teachers in that table, at the table. And it was about 250 people. And there were a couple of the farms that put up farm stands and just gave away the food to everybody who was there. And they also did a project to clear up a stream that had been clogged by the extra rain and put rocks in the stream. And everybody who was there came early and cleared the whole stream for the farmer. And I mean, it's again, it's Habitat for Humanity, it's Jimmy Carter. And I kind of want to do a Habitat for Humanity, something on the mall too, because in honor of him, before he dies, I think we should, I mean, barn raisings were important for the farmers, and we might need to, as a school system, help the farmers to plant or to pick, because it is so gratifying. If you have 100 people, we did to paint a school in San Francisco with the help of Habitat for Humanity. And everybody, every time I go by the school, I said, I helped to paint it, you know, inside and out, and planted a whole garden in one day.
It's a great point. I think with Habitat for Humanity, and when we're doing one of those house builds later, you get a lot out of it.
Oh.
Because you can say, I helped build that. You may have only worked 2 days,
Oh.
but still you feel like
Yes.
you did, and that's what's special about it, Habitat.
But we could do that with the schools. I think of what we did at King. I mean, we ultimately built a nonprofit around it to hire extra teachers and to help maintain the gardens. But it didn't need that. I mean, parents wanted to come and help, and we have that. But we need that encouragement.
And I'd like to, just your point on Jimmy Carter's a good one. There isn't really anything named after him in that kind of way. What it would be your suggestion? He's 99, and we're hoping he makes it October 1, well, right around right after,
Yes.
coinciding with what you're doing. October 1, 2024, he'll be 100. If he
Oh,
goes
he
through.
will.
Be his 100th
Maybe
birthday.
we have to go early to
We have to
Washington.
get it, but what would be your dream? You're very good at ideas and vision. What could we do to honor him in the agricultural sphere?
I think it really needs to be on the mall. And so maybe it's a little grove of trees, or something that is edible, something where you can see the Capitol from that end, something something that's edible for sure.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly what grows in Washington. And I want to explore that, and
Yeah.
we need to do that right away.
It's a wonderful idea.
But we could maybe get people to come early to do that. But there needs to be a monument to him.
And a monument to
To
farmers
his
and
idea,
agricultural
yes.
history and all
Yes,
too.
all of
Yeah,
that.
it's a wonderful thing. We have a
His
limited
100th birthday. I
100th
think.
birthday. We could do.
Oh, yes.
With our limited time remaining, a couple of things. With California, it's remarkable what grows here. But there are a lot of what crops are natural. To California, like what is? You've looked at the world. What is this really an ideal state to grow? 4 or 5 or so.
Well, it's not avocados. We think they come all year long, everywhere. But we only have a couple months of avocados in the springtime, mostly in Southern California. But I think definitely lettuces grow from top to bottom of the state. And more winter lettuces in the north, the chicories and all of that. But I'm impressed because of the restaurant here in LA and learning about everything that is right here. And again, my favorite fruit is a Kishu mandarin that only has those little month or two up in Ojai. And I send them to all the politicians I'm trying to impress. And it works like a charm. They write me back. So to Mayor, along.
Oh, really? Okay.
I'm serious. Everybody responds to a little tiny piece of fruit like this that peels in a second. No pits, and it's heaven. But again, I mean, things like all the different varieties of apples, there are hundreds of varietals in Northern California. And, but again, a lot of it's seasonal. I mean, I can't think of farming without thinking of diversity within farms, so that you're not just having this monocrop. You're thinking of what can be planted under those trees and what needs a lot of water and what doesn't. I mean, that's the big problem of the Central Valley, is the monocropping, and it just doesn't work. But somebody who's doing a lot of research about this is Dan Barber. I don't know whether you know about his restaurant, Stone Barns, back on the East Coast. But he's trying to discover the nutritious varietals that come from around the world. And he's planted them there in his regenerative farm and has come up with squash varietals that are amazing, not only in terms of taste, but in growing potential and preserving potential. And he's wanting to get us out in California growing these things. He's sharing all of his seeds and what he's learned. And I know that that's happening everywhere. I mean, around the world. So we think of another country that, I mean, I just went to Japan. I was so knocked out by their interest in not only children and food and beauty and organic, but their real sharing everything. Great restaurants, and I really appreciated the culture and felt like people needed to know a lot more about it. And this is the book they had printed in Japanese. And they hired the head of Slow Food to do my book tour. And they hired a whole film team to follow us. And they made a film, an hour-long film in Japanese, and now are putting subtitles on it, so it's going to go.
Oh, wonderful.
Now
Yeah, I think of Alice Waters and Frank Lloyd Wright, the Japanese. No, truly, it's a great place for you to, to be and talk. I mean, they'll listen.
Well, they sure did, and I've never had a book tour like that.
Well,
I always thought France was my place, but
no.
Japan is so enlightened about so many, and just the sharing of ideas. And that's so important right now, that we learn the best ways to do everything.
And Alice, you were generous to come to USC. We all loved it, and your sharing of ideas. I mean, all of us here, our minds are opening different, passageways of thinking, and it's going to make us all reconsider everything. But mainly, make sure you guys read We Are What We Eat. There are copies out there. And thank you so much, my friend. Wonderful to be with you.
I have to say one thing, because I have to thank you for writing that incredible book, because I learned so much about the history of this country in terms of environmentalism. And everybody needs to understand what has happened in the past and what we can build on for the future. And I of course listened to it on audio, but it's so beautiful and so inspiring.
Thank you, Alice.
So that's why I'm here, because he asked me to come.
Thank you, guys. We'll
Thank you.
continue it in an informal way. Appreciate it.